Breaking news has just emerged from Ouagadougou that has shaken the world. Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré made a historic decision this morning that has rattled the foundations of the global financial system. Events at the government palace in the capital, Ouagadougou, have created major reverberations in world economic circles. The extraordinary cabinet meeting that began at 9 o'clock local time was interrupted by unexpected developments. Traoré's order marked a milestone not only for Burkina Faso, but for the entire African continent. This bold move by the young leader calls into question the activities of international financial institutions in Africa. Everything began last week with the work of a special audit commission established within Burkina Faso's Ministry of Finance. The team of young technocrats scrutinized the country's agreements with the World Bank. The dire dimensions of the picture that emerged from the investigations deeply shook everyone. According to commission reports, Burkina Faso has paid 15 times the principal amount in interest to the World Bank since 1960. Even more striking was the discovery that most of these loans were used for phantom projects, road projects, hospital constructions, and school building that appeared on paper were never actually implemented. Despite this, payments were made regularly, interest was charged, and debts grew exponentially. In-depth research by finance experts brought incredible documents to light. Secret protocols signed between World Bank representatives and the country's former leaders, commission agreements, and documents showing bribery traffic were revealed one by one. The most striking document was a secret protocol signed by the administration in 2019, pledging 40% of Burkina Faso's gold reserves as World Bank collateral. Moreover, this agreement was kept completely secret from Parliament and the public. Audit Commission Chairman Professor Amadou Sawadogo stated in his report, "The people of Burkina Faso have been subjected to systematic economic exploitation for half a century. The documents in our possession clearly show that this situation is not accidental, but rather a planned and deliberate plunder mechanism." When the files reached President Traoré's desk, the young leader's reaction was fierce. According to palace sources, Traoré experienced great anger while reviewing the documents. He immediately ordered that World Bank West Africa Regional Director James Morrison be summoned to the palace. Morrison arrived at the palace with his delegation in the afternoon. However, he was stunned by the surprise awaiting him. He was taken to the meeting room under tight security measures by palace guards. Traoré was waiting standing, and the expression on his face showed the seriousness of the situation. The dialogue that took place in the meeting was historic. Traoré began speaking by firmly placing the files on the table. "Mr. Morrison, I have documents to show you. Documents showing how you have robbed my country and my people for 50 years. Fake projects, phantom loans, exorbitant interest rates, and much more. Burkina Faso's apparent debt is $4 billion. But we have paid you $23 billion to date. What kind of mathematical understanding is this?" Morrison's attempt at defense was harshly cut off by Traoré. "Don't talk to me about standard procedures, Mr. Morrison. This is called organized plunder, and it ends today. I'm giving you 24 hours. Either you cancel these unjust debts and return what you've stolen, or I'll arrest you and your team for economic war crimes." Morrison's claim of diplomatic immunity was rejected by Traoré. Those who commit economic genocide cannot have immunity. The documents are in my hands. The evidence is clear. Our courts will judge you, and you will receive the punishment you deserve. After the meeting, Traoré appeared before the national and international press. At the press conference held in the palace garden, behind him were the Burkina Faso flag and a portrait of national hero Thomas Sankara. The young leader's statements resonated throughout the world. "Dear Burkinabe brothers and all African peoples, today is a historic day. We are exposing 50 years of lies and plunder. We will stop the global exploitation machine operating under the name of the World Bank. Our fathers were deceived. Our grandfathers were fooled. But this game is now over. Africa's wealth belongs to African peoples, and no one can steal from us. As Traoré showed the documents to the cameras, journalists present experienced great shock. Among the documents were secret agreements signed by former heads of state, commission receipts, and bank statements showing bribery traffic. Immediately after the announcement, large demonstrations began in the streets of Ouagadougou. Thousands of Burkinabés gathered in front of the World Bank office. Slogans of "We want our money back" were chanted. University students carried banners supporting Traoré. Women joined the protests by banging pots and pans. On social media, the hashtag number Traoré's World Bank quickly rose to the top of the global agenda. Millions of Africans sent messages of support to the young leader. Comments were made saying, "Finally, a brave leader who stands up to imperialism has emerged." Support statements began coming from all corners of the African continent. Mali President Assimi Goïta went down in history as the first leader to offer support. Burkina Faso is not alone in this struggle. We too have been subjected to the same plunder system. The time has come to act together. Niger leader Abdourahmane Chiani went even further, calling for all Sahel countries to review their relations with the World Bank. Traoré's courage should be an example to all of us. Africa is now awakening and seeking its rights. Guinea President Mamadi Doumbouya made similar statements. Our young brother Traoré is on the right path. We will also take similar steps soon. Africans should manage Africa's resources. Surprising support came from Uganda. Veteran leader Yoweri Museveni praised his young colleague. What Traoré has done is what we should have done 50 years ago. It's a belated but correct step. An emergency crisis meeting was held at World Bank headquarters in Washington. President Ajay Banga gathered all regional directors. The risk of the Burkina Faso incident spreading to other African countries was discussed. Concerns were expressed that if a domino effect begins, all our operations in Africa will be endangered. International Monetary Fund President Kristalina Georgieva made an urgent statement calling on Burkina Faso to be moderate. However, this call was met with backlash in Africa. Georgieva's statement was interpreted as the panic of colonizers. The Paris administration activated diplomatic channels. Macron's Africa advisor was urgently sent to Ouagadougou. The French Foreign Ministry warned Traoré. However, the young leader refused to receive the French delegation. The message was sent. First, we'll solve the World Bank issue. Then we'll settle accounts with you too. The statement from the United States State Department drew criticism. It said, "We expect Burkina Faso to comply with international rules." However, African experts noted that these were neocolonial rules. The development in the afternoon surprised everyone. James Morrison and his team tried to leave the country secretly. However, Traoré had considered every possibility. Special security units stopped Morrison at the airport. His passport was confiscated and he was brought back to the palace. Meanwhile, the support statement from the People's Republic of China attracted attention. The Beijing administration stated that every country's right to economic independence should be respected. The China Development Bank offered interest-free loans to Burkina Faso. This offer caused discomfort in the West. The Russian Federation made a harsher statement. The Moscow administration characterized the World Bank's activities in Africa as neocolonialism. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said they appreciated Traoré's courage. African peoples have the right to determine their own destiny. In the evening hours, a major leak occurred on social media. The World Bank's secret correspondence was leaked online. Documents showed that African countries were systematically trapped in debt. The document titled "Strategy to Keep Poor Countries in Debt Forever" went viral. The details in the documents were horrific. how African leaders were bought, which banks bribes were deposited into, were written one by one, how media organizations were directed, and how opposing voices were silenced was explained. Towards midnight, Burkina Faso security forces took action. All World Bank offices in Ouagadougou were sealed. Safes were confiscated. Documents found inside were delivered to the prosecutor's office. Traoré announced that all these documents would be used in court. The African Union held an extraordinary meeting in Addis Ababa. 41 of the 53 member countries decided to support Traoré. A commission was established to review relations with the World Bank. The president of the African Development Bank said the continent needs to establish its own financing system. The people of Ouagadougou were on the streets until morning. A vigil was held in front of the World Bank office. Slogans of "We won't let Morrison escape" were chanted. Young people stayed up all night by lighting fires. Traoré's posters were hung everywhere. "Our hero leader" was written on walls. Western media tried to distort the events. CNN International characterized Traoré as populist. BBC World Service claimed economic disaster was at the door. Financial Times ran the headline, "Burkina Faso commits economic suicide." However, African media continued to write the truth. Time was advancing rapidly, and the 24 hours given to Morrison were about to expire. News from Washington was contradictory. Some sources said the World Bank would back down. Others claimed an economic embargo would be imposed on Burkina Faso. As the morning sun rose over Ouagadougou, the historic moment arrived. Morrison was brought back to the palace. Traoré was waiting determinedly. The meeting room was open to journalists. The whole world was watching this moment live. Morrison began to speak with a trembling voice. "I spoke with headquarters. They accept debt restructuring. They can make a 50% reduction." Traoré shook his head. "I don't want restructuring. I want cancellation. I want the return of the stolen $23 billion. Morrison's face turned ashen. "This is impossible. The World Bank doesn't have such authority." Traoré stood up. "Then you are under arrest, Mr. Morrison. You will be tried for economic war crimes." At Traoré's signal, security forces handcuffed Morrison. The World Bank director was being arrested for the first time in history. Morrison, shouting, "I have diplomatic immunity," received a cold look from Traoré. "Those who commit genocide have no immunity." Morrison and his 5-person team were taken to Ouagadougou Central Prison. When the images were broadcast to the world, panic began in financial markets. World Bank shares lost 12% of their value. Western banks operating in Africa went on alert. Traoré addressed the people again at noon. He spoke to the 100,000 people gathered in Thomas Sankara Square. "Dear brothers, today we declare our true independence. No one will rob us anymore. Our wealth is ours. Our gold is ours. Our uranium is ours. We will use these for the welfare of our people." Throughout the speech, the people enthusiastically applauded Traoré. Slogans of "Long live independent Burkina Faso" rose to the sky. Support messages from all corners of Africa were read. Young girls performed traditional dances. The elderly prayed in tears. This event was a turning point not only for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. No African country would be the same anymore. The World Bank and similar institutions would not be able to operate freely in Africa, because now there were brave leaders like Traoré. As the reverberations of the event continued, similar movements began in other African countries. Youth poured into the streets in Senegal. In Ivory Coast, the opposition pressed for cancellation of agreements with the World Bank. In Ghana, university students organized protest marches. Traoré's move created a domino effect. Africa was now awakening. Economic dependencies from the colonial period were being questioned. Young leaders were finding courage. Peoples were seeking their rights. The World Bank had never been so cornered in its history. Morrison's arrest destroyed the institution's reputation. If other African countries took similar steps, the institution's presence in Africa could completely end. With this move, Traoré became a hero not only for Burkina Faso, but for all oppressed peoples. Despite his young age, the courage and determination he showed inspired millions of people. The world order was now changing, and one of the pioneers of this change was Ibrahim Traoré. How events will develop from here is eagerly awaited. Will the World Bank back down, or will Traoré take even harsher steps? Will Morrison really be tried? Will other African countries take similar steps? The answers to all these questions will become clear in the coming days. Traoré's move also led to changes in global power balances. BRICS countries quickly made statements supporting Burkina Faso. Indian Prime Minister Modi said, "We support Africa's rightful struggle." Brazilian leader Lula da Silva called for joint struggle against imperialism. South African President Ramaphosa invited Traoré to Pretoria. Dissenting voices began to rise within the European Union as well. MPs from Spain and Portugal said the World Bank's Africa policies should be questioned. A group of senators from Italy sent a letter of support to Traoré. In Germany, Die Linke Party announced, "We support Africa's rightful demands." In Burkina Faso, people were living in a festive atmosphere. Students in schools were drawing pictures of Traoré. Vendors in markets were shouting, "We kicked out the World Bank." Special prayers were held in mosques and churches. The elderly were saying, "We haven't seen such a leader since Thomas Sankara." The footage of Morrison's arrest was worthy of Hollywood films. The shock on his face as he was put into the prison vehicle with handcuffed hands was reflected in all lenses. Although Western media avoided broadcasting these images, they were shared millions of times on social media. African youth commented, "History is being written." Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro made a surprise move by offering Burkina Faso discounts on petroleum products. He said, "The Bolivarian Revolution is also echoing in Africa." Cuban leader Diaz-Canel promised to send doctors and teachers. Iranian foreign minister stated, "The axis of resistance against imperialism is expanding." Great anxiety also began among World Bank employees. Hundreds of experts on duty in Africa began sending their families back to their countries. The World Bank office in Kenya increased security measures. Personnel in Nigeria began using their leave. The regional center in Ethiopia suspended its activities. The panic atmosphere continued on Wall Street. Funds investing in Africa suffered major losses. Fluctuations increased in commodity markets. Gold prices reached record levels. Experts began using a new term called the Traoré effect. Burkina Faso intelligence extracted even more damning documents from Morrison's computer. 10 years of correspondence showed how African leaders were bought. Details of coup plans, assassination lists, and dark operations emerged. Traoré decided to send these documents to the International Court of Justice. The African diaspora living in France organized large demonstrations. Tens of thousands of people marched in support of Traoré in Paris. In Lyon, Burkinabe students kept vigil in front of the consulate. Celebrations were held in African neighborhoods in Marseille. Even in the American Congress, voices supporting Traoré rose. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party said the World Bank needs to be reformed. Bernie Sanders said, "I understand the rightful struggle of African peoples." Republican Rand Paul stated that foreign aid should be questioned. Notable statements also came from Turkey. While official authorities made balanced statements, great support rose from the public. Turkish users on social media showered Traoré with praise. Discussions began that Turkey, which has historical ties with Africa, should take a more active role in this event. Asian countries like Japan and South Korea maintained their silence. However, Africa experts in these countries said Traoré was right. Professor Yamamoto from Tokyo University commented, Africa's renaissance is beginning. Dr. Kim Park from Seoul said, this could be the harbinger of new world order. The Burkina Faso army was experiencing a complete victory atmosphere. Soldiers showed they were united behind Traoré. Generals announced, we are proud of our young leader. Pilots made victory flights in the sky. The people embraced the army. But one thing is certain, Africa will no longer be the same. New leaders will emerge following the path opened by Traoré. The exploitation system will be destroyed. African peoples will achieve the prosperity they deserve. And the pioneer of this will go down in history as the brave leader Ibrahim Traoré.